horror games. They've never particularly been a genre I've enjoyed. In fact, horror in general is not something that I frequently choose to partake in, even though my wife is a big fan of it. But Alan Wake is rather special in that regard. I remember being excited reading about the exclusive sneak peeks in gaming magazines when I was younger, but being the relatively poor child that I was never able to pick the game up, and it eventually slipped out of my sight. The Alan Wake franchise, and the universe that Remedy has built around it, is one that I've always found to be calling to me on a deep level. What I know of it is born of memes and general gaming culture osmosis, and it tells me that this world of meta-narratives and wacky crazy twists is right up my alley. So in this video, I'm finally going to play through Alan Wake for the first time. I'm going to walk you through the game's opening, discuss the story and gameplay mechanics along the way, and tell you exactly what I think about it as a first-time player. Because despite generally not being a fan of horror, I think Alan Wake might just be an underrated gem. Alan Wake takes some pretty heavy influence from horror icons, perhaps none more apparent than Stephen King, not least because of the name drop, but the opening feels like being dropped into the middle of a Stephen King novel, as we meet Alan Wake, down on his luck author, speeding towards Middletown, America. Having hit a mysterious stranger with our car, we begin the tutorial. I often bemoan games that offer a dull tutorial that tells you what to do rather than shows you. Alan Wake doesn't do this. We start with your basic movement and camera controls. Points of interest are used to encourage the use of basic mechanics, first with brightly illuminated areas below lampposts to initiate movement, and then with a distant mysterious lighthouse. Almost immediately, as we begin to head towards the lighthouse, the mysterious stranger reappears bathed in shadow. He lunges towards us with an axe in hand, rambling about the power of a writer as God to play with people's lives. Presumably a crazed fan, we utilise the sprint mechanic we've just been taught to make a run for it. Again, heading towards light as points of interest. Coming across a locked gate, we're trapped with the Shadow Man and the game teaches us the dodge mechanic. Successfully evading his swings with the axe, we're rewarded with a tidbit of story for the game to fuel our curiosity. As we press forward, the Shadow Man reappears behind us, conjuring a supernatural tornado to chase us down. We run away and take a brief respite in a log cabin, though its protection is fleeting as the tornado batters the cabin's exterior, and just when it seems that there is no escape, a blinding light appears to rip off the cabin's door and provide us with a safe exit. Remember how earlier the game was using light as points of interest to guide us? That helped reinforce the idea that we should head towards the light, as we now learn that the light acts as a safe haven, offering protection from darkness or healing our wounds. Using the lights from the beginning is a wonderful bit of subtle storytelling, reinforcing vital player behaviour of heading towards the light right from the off that is then organically woven into the story as part of the tutorial. As far as tutorials go, this is pretty great. It's exciting and it makes the introduction mechanics engaging rather than just boring instruction, and ties it all into the game's narrative in a way that just can't help but get you wondering what the hell is going on. And we're not even done yet. After we're fully healed, the street light turns off and the glowing light urges us to follow it. It tells us that it's entered our dream in order to teach us what we need to do to survive. First providing a torch to literally burn the darkness off enemies we'll encounter, and then a gun to take them down once their protection is gone. With that, the orb of light leaves, and we continue through Alan's dream as we make the final descent into the lighthouse, last bastion of safety in this nightmare taken over by darkness. Along the way, we'll encounter various enemies to practice what we've learned, until we're caught up by the supernatural tornado and race towards the safety of the lighthouse, dodging debris and wondering if maybe we aren't in Kansas anymore. We wake from this nightmare on the ferry, heading towards the picturesque coastal town of Bright Falls. We find out that Alan is here following a severe bout of writer's block, hoping that escaping the big city will help to grease his creative wheels. Once we land, we head to the local diner where we're expected to collect the keys for the cabin we'll be staying in. In the diner, we meet some of the town's more curious characters, including Alan Wake's biggest fan, two aged rockers past their prime, and a woman who warns us of the dangers of the dark. As we head further in to find the keeper of keys, Carl Stuckey, in the bathroom, we're met by a creepy widow who hands us the keys and insists upon coming to visit us and our wife once we're settled in at the cabin. On our way back out, one of the older rockers mistakes us for a guy named Tom, and the local sheriff tells us to pay them no mind as they're just waiting to be returned to the local clinic for creative people.
Hey, wait! Mrs. Wake! Your keys!
We arrive at the cabin as the sun is setting and learn that our wife Alice has a phobia of the dark. Not wanting to get caught out as night falls, we head straight into the cabin and are tasked with getting the power back on. As we explore, we find a box of books written by Thomas Zane.
Sometimes foreshadowing is relatively obvious.
Not finding anything inside, we head outside and find an old generator that we kickstart to get power back to the cabin. With the power back on, we head inside to find Alice waiting with a surprise for us. Okay, not the kind of game I was expecting, but I'm down.
Well, hello there.
General Kenobi!
I'm not the surprise. It's in the study. Go take a look.
Fine. So it wasn't that kind of game. It turns out that the surprise Alice has brought for us is that she's set up a writing space in the study and wants us to visit Dr. Emil Hartman's nearby clinic for struggling artists. We get into a brief spat over this and storm outside where Alice won't follow. Almost immediately regretting this, we begin to head back, spurred on by the frantic screams of Alice as the cabin plunges into darkness. Surging across the bridge to help her, another of Alan Wake's major horror influences comes to the fore, and flocks of birds descend upon us in sweeping attacks. Despite it all, we're too late, arriving in time only to hear Alice scream as she falls from the lodger's porch and into the dark water below, and we dive in after her. Next thing we know, we're regaining consciousness in Alice's wrecked car. We have no memory of what's happened, but we know that something bad happened to Alice. In the valley below, we spot a gas station, and deciding here is the best place to find help, begin the descent through the dark forest. A lot of Alan Wake is spent shrouded in darkness, heading to the nearest source of light for a small moment of relief. Throughout my playthrough, I found that there was often one thing that the game does better than anything else, and that's atmosphere. And it kind of has to. I mean, it's a horror game, and despite everything that happens throughout the game, all the weirdness, the wackiness, the kookiness, the madness of it all, it does a fantastic job of maintaining this level of uneasiness. Now, maybe it's just the fact that I'm a little bit of a wuss, and I don't like horror stuff in general, but there was not a moment during Alan Wake where anything felt right. There was always something off, either with a character, with a situation, or just with the general vibe of a location or an area. The game manages to sell that this is something that is weird and unheard of, and that something strange is happening without ever really having to spell it out. And of course, as we progress through the game, it does start to spill its secrets. By the time it does though, it is earned. It's been teased for so long and for so well that you want to know what's going on. You want to know what's happening, and the payoff, well, we'll get to that because I do have some thoughts. Back to episode 1 though, and our descent through the forest continues. We once again see the big blob of glowy light, which disappears from view as we head towards it. In its wake, it drops manuscript pages from a novel sharing a title with Alan's next intended book. Continuing on, we soon come across a well-lit lumberyard and the possibility of rescue. The only person we come across though is Carl Stuckey, and well, he's acting a little odd.
Oh, hell. Carl Stuckey. Pleased to meet you.
He's one of the Taken, the main enemies we'll be facing. Problem is, we don't currently have a weapon, so our only recourse is to attempt to navigate through the maze of logs and find safety in the site office before we receive the wrong end of an axe. Luckily though, we find a gun, some ammo and a phone in the office, just in time for a bulldozer to come to life and plough itself and the cabin off the cliff edge. We do a cool action hero escape and almost immediately encounter a blocked off road and more Taken to take down. With this being the first real bit of combat outside of the tutorial, let's take a quick sidestep and go over some of the gameplay loop you'll find in Alan Wake. The majority of your time in Alan Wake is spent doing one of two things: walking and shooting, and often both at the same time. The walking sections are just as you might expect, getting from A to B with a lot of dark, suspenseful atmosphere. As I mentioned earlier, the game does a phenomenal job of keeping up the eerie atmosphere despite environments being pretty samey the whole game. This suspense and atmosphere will occasionally be broken by the Taken ambushing you from the darkness. In many instances, you have a choice of taking them out or just ploughing ahead to the next well-lit, safe area. Other times, you'll have no choice but to stand and fight or run away. The combat itself is fairly simple. You have a range of weapons from the revolver, a couple of different shotguns, a hunting rifle and flare gun, as well as flares and stun grenades. All of the weapons and enemies basically work the same. Hold your torch on them until the protection of the darkness breaks, and then shoot. The difference in weapons mostly boils down to how quickly you can shoot, and how much damage they do. Mechanically, there is pros and cons to each of the weapons. For example, there is often plenty of ammo for the revolver, but it has low damage, whereas the shotguns are fast and have high damage, but low range. That being said, the differences felt relatively minor. I don't think I ever had to change my playstyle in any way to reflect the weapons I had available. The gameplay loop for combat boiled down to kiting the enemy while your torch destroys the darkness shield, shoot them, hopefully for a headshot for a quicker kill, and move on to the next while continuing to kite. The biggest gripe I had with combat, and something that felt quite arbitrary, was enemies out of your line of sight getting cheap hits on you. Taken would frequently end up moving into or spawning outside of your line of sight while engaged with an enemy and just get a cheap shot at you with no visual indication this is coming to allow you to utilize the dodge mechanic. In time, I just kept moving, just in case an enemy was nearby, and this mostly mitigated the issue. But like the rest of combat, you pretty quickly end up in a repetitive routine with most of the enemies you face not really feeling like any kind of threat, unless in the few sections of the game where combat takes place in tight conditions or against larger numbers, and you quickly find yourself getting dogpiled with little options to escape. Enemies will always be able to run slightly faster than you and catch you up, unless you find light, and enemy thrown weapons will also home in on you like a hitman's briefcase. The moment-to-moment gameplay is probably actually one of the weakest elements of Alan Wake, which ironically is actually fine, because as far as I'm concerned, pretty much every other aspect makes up for it. And a good shot with a flare gun genuinely felt great. But enough about combat. This is a Remedy game and a horror to boot. I know, and you know, that none of us are really here for the combat. It's all about the story, baby. And the story of Alan Wake does some heavy lifting, so let's get back to it. Having somewhat successfully fought off our first assailant, so we continue to make our way through the misty forest, crossing over a fast-flowing river and passing through more of the logging camp. Here we find our first episode of Night Springs. These collectibles are episodes of a TV show Alan previously wrote for. Areas you find them in are generally safe, so you can have a couple minutes breather as you watch the episode, each a satirical and abstract short in the style of a classic sci-fi show, The Twilight Zone. Some of the episodes have strong parallels to the events Alan is currently going through, and hopefully we see more of this. Moving on, we face another brief bout against more of the Taken, including the possessed Carl Stuckey, before finally leaving the lumberyard and arriving at the gas station. Fortunately, the gas station isn't a huge reprieve from the uncomfortable events so far, and we find a few things that are, well, just a little disconcerting. It's small, unexplained things. A sign suggesting we've lost a whole week of time between Alice falling in the lake and our car crash, a video of us writing in the cabin, desperate to bring her back, and the gas station looking as though it's been ransacked. We're left wondering just what has happened, and as we find a phone and call the police for help, we're left with even more questions as the sheriff reveals the gas station's owner, Carl Stuckey, has mysteriously disappeared, and that there is no cabin on Cauldron Lake. Episode 1 ends off really strongly, offering a clear snapshot of what the rest of the game will entail. The rest of the episodes, while still pretty strong, don't really offer anything new gameplay-wise, other than just expanding on the mystery growing within the narrative. So let's have a really quick overview of what that narrative entails in the remaining episodes before we go over the game's finale. If it wasn't already clear, there are definitely spoilers ahead. Episode 2 starts off with a flashback to 3 years ago, where during a power outage, Alan tells a scared Alice the story of the clicker, an old flashlight which his mum gave him to scare off monsters in the dark.
Sometimes foreshadowing is relatively obvious.
Back in the present, Alan gets a call from a man claiming to have kidnapped Alice, punches Dr. Hartman in the face, and drives with his agent Barry to Elderwood National Park, where they receive the keys for the rented cabin from Rusty the park ranger. Later that night, Alan heads into the woods to meet the kidnapper, finds an attacked Rusty who has just read his own attack on a manuscript page, kills the possessed Rusty, before continuing deeper into the woods where he teams up with the kidnappers to fight more Taken, this time with flares before getting into a fight with him over a manuscript and falling off a cliff.
You touch her though.
Heading back to the national park to rescue Barry from scary birds, Alan receives a call from the kidnapper demanding the rest of the manuscript or Alice dies, rescues Barry and tries really hard to do some writing. Barry receives a call from Alan's biggest fan who sounds a bit off, and we cut to her seemingly possessed by the woman in black.
Welcome to the
Oh dear diner.
Good girl.
In episode 3, we go to meet Rose in her trailer in an attempt to recover the manuscript, learn the FBI are hot on our trails, and that there are some weird folktales surrounding author Thomas Zane and his wife who mysteriously disappeared in the 1970s.
Sometimes foreshadowing is relatively obvious.
Having been drugged by Rose, we wake up once night sets with only 12 hours left to hand over the manuscript, but oh no, the FBI are here and it's the US, so they're pretty trigger happy. Alan flees into the woods where he eludes law enforcement hunting him until they too are hunted by the darkness. Alan spots the radio station in the distance and hopes that fan/host Pat can help him reach the kidnapper in time, but Pat announces his arrival on the air and within minutes the FBI arrive and open fire.
Started blasting. Bang! Bang!
Adam flees again, receiving a strange call from Alice, and after a brief fight with a tractor, Adam finds a car and heads to the meeting point where the kidnapper never shows. Another call with the flaky kidnapper sees Alan race a tornado to the top of Mirror Peak where the kidnapper reveals he never had Alice. The tornado eats the kidnapper and then eats Alan, who lets off a flare, giving the tornado an upset tummy and spitting Alan out, falling into the water below where he is rescued by a shadowy figure. Episode 4 is where we start to uncover the truth. Alan wakes up at Dr. Hartman's facility where he's told Alice died and everything he's experienced so far has been figments of his imagination to cope with her loss. We meet the Anderson brothers while Hartman checks on the fading power, and the brothers tell Alan to go to their farm and find a song they wrote called Lady of the Light.
Zane! You're alright, Tom. Hey, we like him, don't we, bro? He's gotta go to the farm. The Anderson farm. Valhalla! We wrote it all down, lest we forget. A crash course. All you need to know to get your head right. You need to find the message.
Later that night, the Anderson brothers cause havoc in the facility and Alan begins to make his escape, finding a recording of a phone conversation between Alice and Dr. Hartman that was edited to sound like Alice on the phone calls from the kidnapper. Alan then finds Barry locked up by Hartman, who asks Alan to join him in creating something with the power of the light. The darkness attacks and Alan and Barry escape. They are separated but agree to meet at the Anderson farm. Once there, Alan fights off a swarm of Taken with a rock concert. Safe in the Anderson house, Alan and Barry have the game's finale spoiled by the song that Anderson's told Alan to find. And Barry realise the Lady of the Night is Cynthia Weaver, the town eccentric who is scared of the dark and who we met briefly in episode 1. The two decide to wait until morning to track her down, instead opting to get shit-faced on haunted moonshine. Receiving a drunken vision of the week he lost, Alan discovers he was forced to write a manuscript in an attempt to save Alice, but subconsciously wrote Thomas Zane into the story as a big blob of light to save him from the cabin, setting in motion the events following Alan's car crash. Alan and Barry wake up in a jail cell where Agent Nightingale explains he has all the evidence he needs to put them away for good as the manuscript details his own murder. Alan starts having visions and curls over in pain, and Agent Nightingale trains his gun on him. Recognizing this as the description of his death in the manuscript, Agent Nightingale is unceremoniously yeeted out of the cell room by the lingering tornado. Alan tells the sheriff we met in episode 1 he needs to reach Cynthia to stop the darkness, and she offers the use of the fire department helicopter, but first they'll need to fight their way to the town hall to collect the key. Along the way, the pair are stopped by a large Taken, but are rescued by Christmas Tree Barry. The group fight their way to the helicopter and fly to the power station where Cynthia lives. But oh no, birds! Alan falls from the helicopter and makes the rest of the way up to the power plant on foot. He meets Cynthia, who tells him the well-lit room has what he needs to defeat the darkness. The well-lit room is a safe pipe away from Bright Falls Dam, but Alan leaves to rescue Barry and the sheriff after the helicopter crashes. Following gunshots and flares, the trio are reunited and make it to the dam, where Alan is once again separated and chased by a tornado, barely making it to safety. Within the well-lit room, Alan finds a page written by Thomas Zane and the clicker he gave to Alice. Remember all that foreshadowing? The page reveals Alan received the clicker as a child and details how to defeat the darkness. Realizing what needs to be done, Alan sets out to ensure the events on the page play out exactly as written.
My mind swirled. I'd given the clicker to Alice, yet it was here. Zane had written it into existence in a story I had written. I can get to her now. I can finish this.
Alan presses the clicker and nothing happens. He tells them that in order to finish the story, he'll need to head back to Cauldron Lake and read the page left in the typewriter, and naturally, he needs to do so alone. Alan says goodbye to Barry and makes his way out of the dam where it has mysteriously turned to day. Stealing a car, Alan drives toward the lake until his path is blocked. He proceeds on foot into the obvious trap until he has more visions and the day snaps back to nighttime. The doctor seems real unhappy about this and does everything it can to stop Alan progressing to the lake. Turns out, just throwing junk around isn't the best way to stop someone, and Alan eventually makes it back, where he finds the woman in black waiting for him in the center of a huge tornado. Alan employs the tornado's natural predator, the flare, to weaken it, and as it fades away, follows the directions of the page and throws himself into the lake. Alan wakes up in his apartment, but everything seems wrong. Alice claims he has her fear of the dark and teleports in front of him as he moves through the apartment. He reaches his living room, sees the word clicker, and burns it away, causing the clicker to appear in front of him. He clicks it, and the apartment fades away, revealing Thomas Zane in the distance. He tells Alan that he needs to reach the cabin to defeat the lady in black, and a copy of Alan appears. Zane explains that this is Mr. Scratch, and Mr. Scratch will return to the real world to take Alan's place, while Alan is sent to the dark place. In the dark place are more floating words, which when burned away reveal the items, eventually causing the cabin to fully materialise alongside the woman in black. She has a hole in her chest and so is understandably after a new body to possess. Alan shoves his hand in her hole and presses the clicker, burning her away with light. We flash back to Alan jumping in the lake after Alice, but this time see Alice swim out of the lake with both the cabin and Alan gone. Bright Springs seems to be prospering once again, but maybe all is not as it seems.
It's not a lake. It's an ocean.
Wow, what a wild ride. Alan Wake is often lauded for its strong narrative, pacing, and atmosphere among other things, and that high praise is well deserved. What stood out for me was how well everything is presented to the audience throughout the game. The plot twists and reveals not only make sense, but are earned. Now, I have to admit, while I have intentionally avoided spoilers for Alan Wake to the best of my ability for the last 16 years, knowing I would eventually get around to tasting the franchise for myself, I didn't find the plot twists and reveals to be all that surprising. I put it down to general gaming pop culture osmosis, cluing me into the meta and strangeness of the Alan Wake universe, and my own deep interest in writing and storytelling. I like metafiction narratives, like the story within a story of Alan Wake, and knowing that this was the nature of the story, I was immediately on the lookout for clues in an attempt to piece together things and figure it out. I think the biggest strength of Alan Wake is that didn't spoil the experience for me. In fact, I think it amplified it. I found myself far more engrossed in and entertained by the game than I might have otherwise been had it not been for the fact that I wanted to know every detail, find every puzzle piece, and see if I could put it all together. So when certain reveals, both major and minor, take place in the last couple of episodes, my immediate reaction was one of apathy or mild disappointment. Not because the reveal or twist itself was bad, but because it had only matched my expectations of how things would go. and I'd really hoped that my assumptions of where the story was going would be completely blown away by something crazy or left field. Perhaps this is an inevitability when replaying older games for the first time. I know that my thoughts on Alan Wake are shaped by the game's wider standing in pop culture, of the memes and comments I've seen around the internet, even if I didn't have the context for them, and how the Alan Wake universe is now shaped by later releases. Maybe I didn't go in with as clean a slate as I thought. Did I expect too much? I realised when writing the episode summaries in the script weeks after I'd finished the game just how ridiculous Alan Wake is. Alan Wake is pure nonsense, a goofy soul wrapped up in a scary costume. Fighting possessed tractors and racing tornadoes sounds silly when you write it down, but it just makes sense when you're engrossed in the narrative. It all feels natural. It's another major strength of the game that it's able to maintain a consistent tone and marry together the serious and dark aspects of its psychological thriller stylings with the outright absurdity present in its plot. I think the scary costume is a good one. The atmosphere, lighting, and soundtrack all work together and ensure that even when the plot is at its wildest, I never truly fell out of the woods. I was always on the edge of my seat, and I was always clamouring for more. And thankfully, there is more to come. Alan Wake, while mostly regarded as a cult classic, spawned a greater universe. And now that I've experienced Alan Wake, I fully intend to sink my teeth into it. I'll be finishing off the DLC for Alan Wake, then stepping into Quantum Break, Control, Alan Wake 2, and when it releases this year, Control Resonant to experience this universe in all of its wackiness. At this point, Alan Wake has primed me to want to explore this universe further, and maybe even come back to it once I've experienced the rest of what the universe has to offer, to discuss it in even more detail and really analyse the story of Alan Wake. But we'll save that once I'm more caught up. So, if you enjoyed this video, thank you for watching and thank you for getting this far. If you did enjoy what you've seen, please feel free to leave me a like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. If you do want to see me explore the rest of the Remedy universe, then definitely leave a comment below letting me know. Until then, once again, thank you for watching.